The Pistola Parabellum, or P08, known commonly by the name Luger, after the man who first patented the design, Austrian Georg Luger, is the firearm most associated with the German military in not one but two world wars. It was also the must-have bring-back trophy gun for Allied troops in both world wars, and remains a highly collected and appreciated high-end semi-automatic pistol today. One question that surfaces often is whether or not Japan, Nazi Germany's World War II ally, used German Lugers. Lugers turn up now and again in the US marked with the Imperial Japanese chrysanthemum crest, and have been almost universally derided as fakes for various reasons. One of the major objections to these pistols is the fact that the Japanese had a thriving arms manufacturing establishment from the late 19th century through to World War II, and had no need or indeed no interest in importing German weapons to arm its troops. Indeed, during World War II, about the only German-manufactured weapon the Japanese actually used was a batch of MG-151 aerial cannons that were used to arm one type of Japanese fighter, the Kawasaki Ki-61 Hien. But, nonetheless, a few Lugers were found to be in possession of Japanese officers, and some were almost definitely recovered in Japan during the immediate post-war occupation period. In fact, the Japanese did have access to German-manufactured Lugers through 4 avenues that led to their occasional appearance on the World War II battlefield. The first was by private purchase. In the Imperial Japanese Army, officers were required to purchase their sidearms, and while most patriotically bought homegrown models such as the Papa Nambu, properly the Nambu Type A modified pistol, or its most common descendant, the Nambu Type 14, ironically often referred to as the Japanese Luger, some officers bought more exotic foreign pistols. American models like the Colt 1908 hammerless being quite popular. The Japanese held Germany in high regard and had latterly modelled the Imperial Army on the Prussian Army, and German weapons were respected. The Luger was sold as a high-end private purchase firearm in Japan between the wars, and a few undoubtedly were carried into combat in World War II through this avenue. The second source of Lugers for the Imperial Army occurred in World War I. During that conflict, Japan was one of the Entente powers, and therefore as an ally of Britain and France took an active part in the fighting against Germany. In 1914, the British and Japanese jointly strove to capture the German colony of Kiaochao in China, including the important naval base at Qingdao. A serious battle occurred, resulting in German defeat. The Japanese definitely captured a lot of German weapons from the garrison, among them probably several dozen 1906 Navy Lugers. The Japanese didn't use the type, and by all accounts, these Lugers were placed in long-term storage in Tokyo, where, just after the war ended, they were found by US occupation personnel during the course of Japan's disarmament. Such Lugers are marked with German imperial marks for the colonial garrison. The third source of Lugers was China. Like the Japanese, the Chinese also admired German-made weapons. Huge numbers of Mauser C96 broom-handle pistols with shoulder stocks were imported into China by both the official interwar army, the National Revolutionary Army led by Chiang Kai-shek, and by various Chinese warlords. Indeed, the Chinese also manufactured copies of these weapons, such as the infamous Wowzer. The Japanese captured thousands of Mauser C96s during their war with China between 1937 and 1945, but the C96s were not issued to Japanese troops, being instead used to arm collaborationist units made up of Chinese and Manchurians. Some Chinese officers had obtained Lugers before the war through commercial routes, and a few of these ended up being captured by the Japanese. The fourth, and by far the largest source of Lugers for the Japanese, was the Netherlands. As well as attacking US and British possessions and bases in the Pacific and Asia in December 1941, the Japanese needed the oil produced by the Dutch East Indies, today's Indonesia. In 1911, the Royal Netherlands East Indies Army had ordered 4,181 Luger pistols for use by colonial officers, delivered in 4 batches up to 1914. The Dutch used the definition Luger M11 for the weapon after the year the first batch arrived, and they were Luger 1906 pistols, quite distinctive both with their grip safety and also a small brass plaque showing a unit designation which was fixed to the left side of the gun. The Dutch had also received a further batch of 6,000 Lugers in 1922, most of them sent out to the Far East as well, supplied not by DWM but instead Vickers, the famous British company. The British Lugers were exact copies of the DWM 1908 pistol, except for not being fitted with a stock lug and having the words Vickers Limited engraved on the toggle and Birmingham proof marks on the barrel. Huge numbers of these Dutch Lugers were still in service when the Japanese invasion of the Dutch East Indies commenced, and following the Dutch surrender they fell of course into Japanese hands. Some definitely ended up being used by Japanese officers, as we see in this screenshot, taken after the famous raid on Makin Atoll during World War II by Carlson's Raiders, a special forces unit made up of US Marines. The Marine holds up a captured Japanese sidearm, which is in fact, as you can see, a Dutch East Indies colonial Luger pistol, its distinctive brass unit plate still secured to the left side of the pistol. I think it most likely that Dutch Lugers were amongst the largest group of these weapons that the Japanese obtained, and probably most ended up in long-term storage alongside the German colonial Navy Lugers captured in 1914. Both groups of weapons being liberated by US occupation troops in 1945. But of course there's also a lot of fakery going around. You can imagine the value of a real Japanese-used Luger, and putting on fake markings such as chrysanthemum crests would be one way to increase the value of a standard Luger pistol. It has been noted that the Japanese army did not remark captured weapons with imperial chrysanthemum symbols, these symbols of course being most closely associated with the Emperor of Japan and therefore sacred. They only appeared on Japanese-manufactured weapons. Many thanks for watching, please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon, details in the description box below.